Last time we spoke about Gokujo and the collaborators. In September of 1931, the Japanese Imperial General Headquarters aimed to contain the Mukden incident, but faced resistance from the Kwangtung Command. Led by General Hanzhou, Japanese forces quickly overwhelmed Chinese troops, seizing key cities in Manchuria. Despite Tokyo's disapproval, military leaders acted independently, invoking the emperor's authority. Amidst the chaos, local Chinese leaders cooperated with the invaders, leading to a swift Japanese victory. As the military expanded its powers, the civilian government struggled to retain control, illustrating the complexities of the Japanese political landscape. The Kwangtung army officers, led by Ishiwara and Itagaki, aimed for a military occupation of Manchuria, initially allowing local officials autonomy. However, Tokyo's rejection of annexation forced them to claim Manchurian independence instead. Amidst confusion and infighting, Komai Tokuzu emerged as a key figure, manipulating local elites to establish control. The Japanese employed violence and persuasion, swiftly occupying cities while puppet leaders faced a facade of governance. As resistance brewed, Zhang Haipeng and others sought to reclaim their homeland from Japanese dominance. This episode is the Jiangqiao campaign, the resistance of Ma Zhanshan. Welcome back to the Fall and Rise of China podcast. I'm your dutiful host, Craig Watson. Before we begin, I just want to remind you all that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Perhaps you want to learn a bit more about the history of Asia? Kings and Generals has an assortment of episodes on the history of Asia and so much more, so give them a look over at YouTube. So please subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube, and continue to help produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. And hey, don't forget about our sister podcast over at the Pacific War Week by Week podcast, written and aired by me. And if after all that, if you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel, found over at YouTube, and Echoes of War, my newly titled podcast on all major podcast platforms. Over on YouTube, I just released the third part of my series covering how to play Axis and Allies, this episode being on how to play the Soviet Union. If you haven't seen any of those episodes, they're kind of worth it for the memes alone. A little cringe, but it's funny. And over on Echoes of War, we just completed our 4-part series covering the best and worst generals, admirals, and air commanders of World War II. And if you'd like to further support me, please go check out my YouTube membership or my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel. By joining either, you get access to the exclusive podcast series, which is about 22 plus episodes last time I checked. You get early access to all the content I make and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. Recently, there was a poll for the next episode, and it is going to be on how the Sicilian Mafia helped the Allies during World War II. Plus, a little bit of a bonus, I wanted to talk a little bit about the history of Lucky Luciano. Or I think it might be pronounced Luciano. I don't know, in the movies, sometimes they say both. But anyways, it's going to be a hell of a fun episode. Please go check it out. For quite some time, we have spoken about countless variables involved with the conquest of Manchuria. More or less, we broke down 3 sorts of players in this invasion. Those Chinese who chose to collaborate with the Japanese, those who tried to act neutral and sit upon the fence, and then there were those who actually resisted. The resistance against the Japanese was not unified. Often it was pockets of groups trying to hold out as long as possible. The resistance took on various forms for various reasons. One of the resistance stories I always found more interesting than the rest was, of course, the story of Ma Zhanshan. Ma Zhanshan was born in 1885 in Guangzhouling of Jilin province, to a poor shepherding family. Ma Zhanshan was of Manchu heritage, as stated by his grandson, Man Hui, who would become a member of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference. At a very young age, Ma Zhanshan joined a bandit group in Huihushan. This bandit group gradually was incorporated into some of the troops of the Huaidu County, Yamen. During the Russo-Japanese War, Ma Zhanshan was one of the many local soldiers who served under the Japanese. At the age of 20, as a result of his exceptional marksmanship and equestrianism, Ma Zhanshan was promoted to the guard monitor of the 4th Security Guard Battalion under Wu Zhenxiang. Wu Zhenxiang commanded the Tuanhou Road Patrol and a defense battalion for Mukden in 1908. In 1913, Ma Zhanshan was appointed as major and a company commander over the 3rd Company, 3rd Regiment of the 2nd Brigade of the Central Cavalry Army of the Republic of China. By 1920, he was promoted to a colonel and he followed his superior Ma Zhanshan, who became a warlord. Gradually found himself serving in Jiangqiao Lin's northeastern army, serving as a brigade commander of the 5th Cavalry Brigade, 17th Cavalry Division. By 1927, he was transferred over to Heilongjiang Province, where he became a garrison commander at Huaihe, along the Soviet border. After Zhang Haipeng's death in 1928, Ma Zhanshan was nominated as Heilongjiang's provincial bandit suppression commander and the provincial cavalry commander-in-chief. During the Mukden incident, on September 18, 1931, General Qiqihar, the deputy commander-in-chief of Qiqihar, took a series of strategic measures to block the Japanese and their Chinese collaborationist troops from invading the territory. Qiqihar dispatched 2 battalions of infantry and an artillery regiment to defend Qiqihar under Bingshan, a regiment led by Zhu Fengyang from Shaohaozhi Station in Taila to guard the direction of Taoyuan, the 1st Cavalry Brigade of Wu Shangli from Baichuan to Qiqihar, a guard regiment under Xu Baojian with a battalion of artillery and a company of engineers and a company of baggage, roughly 2,000 people, to take up a position north of Jiangqiao, where they would begin building fortifications, laying minefields, and fortifying south of the critical Nanjiang Bridge, where they would mount 100 Czech-made light machine guns to the front lines. Now, when the Mukden incident broke out, the governor of Heilongjiang Province, Wan Fulin, was in Beiping, leaving no one in real authority in the province to take charge of the defenses against the Japanese. Meanwhile, Liaoning and Jilin were basically trampled upon without any incident. From Beiping, Zhang Haipeng telegraphed the Nanjing government to ask for instructions as to what he should do, but in the meantime he appointed Ma Zhanshan as acting governor and military commander-in-chief of Heilongjiang Province on October 10, 1931. Now a full general, Ma Zhanshan arrived at the capital of Qiqihar on the 19th, and he began personally inspecting the troops and defensive positions. By this point, Chiang Kai-shek had made it known the stance of Nanjing was one of passiveness, to wait for negotiations to unfold to settle the matter. Zhang Haipeng loyally followed said commands, but multiple parties within Manchuria sought to either surrender, collaborate, or resist the Japanese. Under these circumstances, Ma Zhanshan told his troops, "I am appointed as chairman of the province, and I have the responsibility to defend the province, and I will never be a surrendering general." Thus, Ma Zhanshan chose to disobey the Kuomintang's orders not to resist the Japanese. Meanwhile, also during the month of October, General Zhang Haipeng of the 2nd Provincial Defense Brigade at Taoyuan had just been approached by the Japanese seeking collaboration. Zhang Haipeng had been a Honghuze irregular cavalry commander during the First Sino-Japanese War. He later became a mercenary during the Russo-Japanese War, and he went on to study at the Northeast Military Academy. After the Xinhua Revolution, he was assigned command of an infantry regiment, but was one of the morons who supported Jiang Qun's attempt to restore the Qing dynasty in 1917. After that debacle, he went to work for Jiangqiao in 1923, and he was appointed a commissioner of the Chinese Eastern Railway. When the Japanese asked him to collaborate, Zhang Haipeng immediately seized command of the local forces, including Xin'an's Reclamation Army, and he declared the district independent from China. He did this in return for a shipment of military supplies from the IJA. Upon taking charge on October 23rd, Zhang Haipeng dispatched 3 regiments from Baijiangzi to attack Jiangqiao, led by General Xu Jinglong. Xu Jinglong's advance guard with an engineering company was attacked by forces led by General Dou Lianfang, defending the north bank around the Nanjiang Bridge. During said battle, Ma Zhanshan had his forces use dynamite to damage the Nanjiang Railroad Bridge. The Japanese began repeatedly demanding Ma Zhanshan allow them to repair the bridge, but he continuously refused, and he had his forces defend the area near Daxing, preventing Zhang Haipeng's men from proceeding north. By October 15th, the Japanese provided some fighter-bomber support, but Zhang Haipeng's forces suffered heavy casualties and they were counterattacked until they had to retreat. At this time, Ma Zhanshan was traveling from Heihe to Qiqihar. By the 20th, Ma Zhanshan had officially taken office as the acting chairman of Heilongjiang Province. He went to the front lines to encourage the men. Once there, he issued a reward for the head of Zhang Haipeng and announced the establishment of the Heilongjiang Army Provincial HQ. Qiqihar became his chief of staff and deputy commander. On October 22nd, Ma Zhanshan issued a declaration in response to the Japanese massing forces along the border of Heilongjiang. In this difficult time for the country, 2 of the 3 provinces have been lost. Those who have a little conscience will all sleep on straw and taste gall and swear to survive. Although our Heilongjiang is still clean piece of land, from now on, anyone who invades our province will fight to the death. Ma Zhanshan then went to work, grabbing reports from his generals such as Qiqihar about the state of their defenses. He immediately began adjusting the deployment of forces. He appointed Pu Bingshan as the commander of the provincial capital garrison to enhance the defense of the area. Wang Yingping was designated as commander of the Hehe garrison, taking over from Ma Zhanshan. Additionally, he organized 3 infantry regiments, 1 cavalry regiment, and 1 artillery battalion from the Northeast Reclamation Army into the 1st Infantry Brigade, positioning them south of Daxing. The cavalry unit was deployed west of Fuliaoji to secure the Jingxing direction. By October the 29th, the establishment of 3 defensive positions extending approximately 40 kilometers in depth and 10 kilometers in width from Jiangqiao to Yushutuan and Angangqi was largely completed, with railways securing the central axis. Liu Wangkui, the former head of the Ning'an Public Security Bureau, led over 1,000 troops to be reorganized west of Ning'an on the 15th. This would form the 5th Independent Regiment of the Self-Defense Army. Following the defeat of Zhang Haipeng's rebels, the Guangdong Army was prepared to deploy troops directly. They viewed the destruction of the Nanjiang Bridge by the Chinese army as a prime justification for this action. Consequently, they decided to establish the Nanjiang Detachment, consisting of 1 infantry battalion, 1 artillery battalion, and an engineering squadron from the 16th Regiment of the 2nd Division, supported by the 8th Independent Flying Squadron. Their plan was to use military force to secure the bridge repair, incite some trouble, and launch an attack. However, the Japanese Army Ministry and the General Staff Headquarters were still wary of the Soviet Union at this time, and they did not endorse the Guangdong Army's offensive. Kanaya Nobumitsu sent a telegram to the Guangdong Army stating this: "You may proceed to repair the river bridge. However, you are not permitted to deploy troops to North Manchuria, far from the Nanjiang River, without my approval, regardless of any circumstances." However, when Hirota Koki, the Japanese ambassador to the Soviet Union, learned that the Soviet Deputy Foreign Minister, Qiqihar, on October the 29th, said that the Soviet Union would not support either side in this conflict and would maintain a, quote, strict non-intervention policy, the stance of the Japanese Army Ministry shifted, leading them to back the Guangdong Army. On November the 2nd, Honjo Shigeru instructed Hayashi Yoshihide, the head of the Qiqihar Japanese Secret Service, to deliver an ultimatum to Ma Zhanshan. The ultimatum demanded that Ma Zhanshan's troops withdraw to a location at least 10 kilometers from the Nanjiang Iron Bridge by noon on the 3rd, and to refrain from entering the area until the Japanese army had completed repairs upon said bridge. If these conditions were not met, the Japanese army would resort to force. So in compliance with these orders, on November the 4th, Ma Zhanshan sent some subordinates to accompany Major Hayashi Yoshihide, so the Japanese might begin work, and so I could order my army to start its retreat. Then Ma Zhanshan gave more assurances to the Japanese repairing operation that it would not be interfered with. Meanwhile, he was telegramming his other subordinates, "Paint all of Manchuria red with the blood of Japanese troops." A force of 800 Japanese, led by Major General Shogu Hasebe, with repair crews, came to the area to find Daxing a complete war zone. Shogu found Ma Zhanshan's subordinate on the ground, Xu Baojian, and he demanded the fighting cease so that he could repair the bridge. Xu Baojian said he never received any orders to cease fighting. The Japanese claimed the nearby 2,500 Chinese forces of Ma Zhanshan began opening fire upon them using rifles and machine guns. The Japanese retaliated likewise, and the Japanese had aircraft support that began strafing the Chinese, forcing them to retreat towards Qiqihar. During this, the Chinese would suffer 120 casualties, and reportedly the Japanese only 15. That day, the Japanese Nanjiang Detachment's advanced squadron moved northwards from Jiangqiao Station, supported by aircraft. After crossing the Nanjiang Bridge, they launched an assault upon the Chinese army positions south of Daxing Station. At that time, Xu Baojian's and Zhang Jingdu's troops from Ma Zhanshan's Guard Regiment, totaling some 2,700 soldiers, rose to confront the enemy, and they successfully repelled them. During the afternoon, the Japanese forces, now numbering some 4,000, led by Colonel Hamamoto, attacked Jiangqiao with the support of aircraft, tanks, and heavy artillery. They initially penetrated the left flank of Jiangqiao before launching a fierce assault upon the main Daxing line position in front of the town. Despite the Chinese defenders' resistance, the Japanese managed to breach their positions, leading to intense hand-to-hand combat. Despite this, the Japanese forces were forced to retreat to the riverbank, where they were ambushed by further Chinese troops concealed in the reeds. As reinforcements for the Japanese arrived, they were quickly flanked by the defending cavalry, forcing them to retreat once more. By 8 p.m., the Japanese forces had completely pulled out, leaving behind over 400 casualties. That night, following a sustained artillery bombardment, the Japanese attempted a surprise boat attack. As their boats neared the northern bank, the Chinese troops hidden in the reeds opened fire, resulting in many Japanese soldiers falling into the water, either killed or wounded, while the remainder retreated. On that day, the Chinese army suffered over 300 casualties, while the Japanese and their puppet forces incurred more than 1,000 losses. Despite concentrating their forces and launching continuous attacks with air and artillery support, the Japanese were ultimately repelled by the defenders. Lieutenant Shinichiro Ojin, a Japanese pilot flying low, who dropped bombs, was also injured during this conflict. The Japanese then sent word to Ma Zhanshan demanding he make true on his promise, but Ma Zhanshan responded that of his 15,000 troops, he could only nominally control about a third of them. Ma Zhanshan then sent a telegram to the League of Nations itself, stating this: "I am helpless. I have exhausted all attempts to preserve peace. I have strictly instructed my commanders to act only on the defensive, and that they must not attack. But Meiji and this behavior by the Japanese military not only has not stopped, but, on the contrary, wants our army to withdraw from Heilongjiang province, so that they can carve up the whole lot. Since the 4th, the Japanese army has started to attack our army. They are coordinating land and air attacks, carrying out utterly horrible bombings." On the morning of the 5th, the Japanese army focused all of its efforts on launching another assault. At 6 a.m., the Japanese forces bombarded the defenders' positions with numerous cannons. By 7 a.m., over 8,000 Japanese and puppet troops crossed the river via the central route, while additional puppet forces advanced from the left and right, shielded by artillery and aircraft. As the boats reached the midpoint of the river, the Chinese army mounted a vigorous counterattack. Despite suffering significant casualties, the Japanese and puppet troops persisted in their attempt to cross. By 10 a.m., the Japanese army had taken the frontline positions on the riverbank, forcing the defenders to retreat to the flanks. The Japanese then launched an assault on the second line of the defense at Daxing, where they faced staunch resistance from the defenders. At noon, Ma Zhanshan arrived at the front lines to direct Wu Dulin's and Xu Baojian's regiments in a counteroffensive, urgently sending the Sabi Regiment of the 1st Cavalry Brigade to encircle the Japanese forces from both sides. The brutal fighting continued from 3 p.m. until dusk. The Japanese would acknowledge, "The Chinese army executed an encirclement counterattack using infantry and cavalry. The Japanese army suffered heavy losses and was compelled to retreat." The Japanese forces were forced to shift from an offensive to a defensive stance, with many of their supporting units annihilated by the Chinese cavalry. In this engagement, the Chinese army incurred over 200 casualties, while the Japanese army lost a reported 167 soldiers and sustained more than 600 injuries. That night, a battalion from the 29th Regiment of the Japanese army arrived as reinforcements. Upon their arrival, they immediately launched an attack, but they were quickly surrounded by Ma Zhanshan's forces. In response, Honjo Shigeru urgently dispatched an infantry battalion and 3 artillery squadrons from the 16th Regiment to assist them. On the morning of the 6th, Japanese reinforcements arrived and launched a vigorous assault supported by aircraft that conducted strafing and bombing runs in an attempt to rescue the encircled Japanese forces. On that day, Ma Zhanshan personally visited the front lines to oversee the battle. Both sides incurred significant casualties. Despite the fierce resistance from Ma Zhanshan's troops, the Japanese offensive struggled to gain any ground. In response, Hongo Shigeru ordered Tamonjiro of the 2nd Division to lead the 29th Regiment, the 2nd Cavalry Regiment, the 2nd Field Artillery Regiment, the Temporary Field Heavy Artillery Battalion, the Engineer Squadron, and a battalion of the 39th Mixed Brigade in the Shenyang area to rush to the vicinity of the Nanjiang Bridge. Their objective was to reinforce the forces, attack the defenders, and capture the key position at Daxing. The Chinese army fought desperately, with the sounds of hand-to-hand combat echoing loudly as they repeatedly recaptured lost positions. That day, the Chinese forces suffered over 1,850 casualties, while inflicting more than 2,000 deaths apparently upon the Japanese and puppet troops, and the shooting down of one aircraft. The Japanese Hamamoto detachment was nearly annihilated, and the Gabo cavalry team sustained almost total losses. After 3 days and 2 nights of continuous fighting, without any reinforcements, the soldiers were extremely fatigued, and the Daxiang position had been heavily damaged. General Ma Zhanshan then ordered the main forces to withdraw to a secondary position at Sanjiangfang. This is located 18 kilometers from Daxing Station, to reorganize defenses along with the 1st Cavalry Brigade and the 1st Infantry Brigade. On the morning of the 7th, a significant force of Japanese and puppet troops, supported by 10 aircraft, launched an attack upon the Nanjiang area of Sanjiangfang. In response, a combined regiment from Zhang Jianqiao's brigade and Su Bingwen's brigade quickly mobilized to counterattack, successfully repelling the enemy by the afternoon. The Chinese forces incurred over 300 casualties, while the Japanese suffered more than 600 casualties, along with 1,000 from their puppet troops. Notably, and please take this one with a grain of salt as it comes from the PRC, despite ongoing enemy air assaults and the lack of anti-aircraft artillery, the courageous soldiers displayed remarkable ingenuity by lying on the ground in groups of 20 and firing their rifles upwards, ultimately managing to shoot down an enemy aircraft. If any of you happen to watch Chinese World War II dramas, you've probably seen a scene or two that looks exactly like this. Upon inspection, the wreckage revealed about 26 bullet holes in both wings, and this would mark the first enemy plane downed in China's war against Japan. As a result, Japanese aircraft became hesitant to fly at low altitudes in the subsequent battles. Observing the heavy losses inflicted upon his forces, Hanzho Shigeru ordered Daomenjiro to halt their advance and to return to the original positions. To conceal the reality of their defeat, the Japanese army circulated rumors claiming that the Soviet Union supplied ammunition to the defenders in Heilongjiang. They also propagated various falsehoods to downplay the number of Japanese casualties, worrying that the anti-war sentiment in Japan would gain some momentum. In response, Ma Zhanshan sent a telegram to counter the Japanese army's claims. The Japanese army experienced significant losses during the initial phase of the battle. To resolve the stalemate quickly, they deployed additional troops and made every effort to prepare for a renewed attack. Simultaneously, they sent an ultimatum to Ma Zhanshan, pressuring him to resign, relinquish power, and withdraw Chinese forces from Qiqihar, but Ma Zhanshan firmly refused this. The Kwangtung Army recommended that the Japanese Army Central Department expedite the deployment of an extra division. In response to this, Hanzho Shigeru ordered the 2nd Division to gather in Daxing with full force. By the 11th, the Japanese Army had assembled the Hase Brigade headquarters, the 16th Infantry Regiment, the 4th Regiment, the 1st Battalion of the 29th Regiment, the 2nd Cavalry Regiment, and the 2nd Squadron of the 28th Regiment, along with the 2nd Field Artillery Regiment and 2nd Engineer Squadron on the north bank of the Nanjiang River. Over on the south bank, they had the 3rd Battalion of the 26th Field Artillery Regiment and a temporary Field Heavy Artillery Battalion totaling over 30,000 troops. In response to the Japanese Army's troop deployment, Ma Zhanshan convened a military meeting on the evening of the 7th to discuss strategies for countering the enemy and to reorganize the troop placements and establish 3 lines of defense. The first line of defense was located in Tangqi, Wenaotou, and Xilingtun, with frontline positions at Huiyiba, Jiangguangde, Honggangde, defended by 2 regiments from Wu Songling's 1st Cavalry Brigade. After the 14th, Lu Jiyuan's 2nd Cavalry Brigade was fully deployed to engage in combat in Tangqi and the surrounding areas. The 2nd line of defense was situated in Yinglaofen, Sanjiangfeng, Daxingchuan, Xiaoxingchuan, and Hotuangqi, serving as a primary position for the Black Army's front defense. This line was manned by 4 regiments from Yuan Chongyu's 1st Brigade, Wu Duilin's 2nd Infantry Brigade, Li Qingshan's 3rd Infantry Brigade, Wang Kuzhen's 1st Cavalry Brigade, as well as Bingshan's Artillery Regiment and various engineering and supporting units. Following the 14th, Sun Hongyu's 1st Infantry Brigade and 2,000 personnel from the Suhua Security Battalion joined the frontal defense efforts. The 3rd line of defense was established in Jiahuan, Fularji, Angangxi, and Yushantuan, defended by 2 regiments from Zhang Daoju's 1st Infantry Brigade, the entire 2nd Cavalry Brigade, and the Guard Regiment, totaling some 13,000 troops. Sanjiangfang is a station located on the railway line from Taoyuan to Angangxi, situated about 70 li north of Qiqihar and 60 li south of the Nanjiang Bridge. This served as a crucial defensive site for the Chinese army in protecting the capital of Heilongjiang province. For the Japanese army to take control of Heilongjiang province, capturing Sanjiangfang was essential for the direct route to Qiqihar. Thus, consequently, the struggle for Sanjiangfang became the central point in the second phase of the battle for Jiangqiao. On the morning of the 12th, a vanguard of 500 Japanese infantry and cavalry launched an assault on Ma Zhanshan's frontier positions at Changguangzhi, Huoguangzhi, and Jianghuayuan. The defending forces under Wu Songling mounted a counterattack. By 1 p.m., the Japanese army had taken control of the positions, forcing over 600 defenders to retreat from the front lines. At 5 a.m. on the 13th, more than 500 Japanese troops supported by 2 aircraft attacked Xinlingtuan, but they faced a strong counteroffensive from the defenders. By 10 a.m., the defenders had successfully repelled the attack, and at noon that day, the damaged Nanjiang Bridge was fully repaired, creating an advantageous condition for a large-scale Japanese offensive. At this point, Honjo Shigeru issued a third reinforcement order, quote, "Deploy the remaining troops of the 2nd Division, along with 3 infantry battalions from the 39th Mixed Brigade and a rescue squad to the vicinity of Daxing." He also instructed Lieutenant General Daimon, the commander of the 2nd Division, to lead the Nanjiang detachment, and in response, the Japanese headquarters hastily dispatched 3 air squadrons to Heilongjiang province and redirected the 4th Mixed Brigade, initially set upon land in Dalian, to head over to Busan, Korea for swift deployment to Heilongjiang province. In the afternoon, over 3,000 Japanese infantry and cavalry, supported by artillery, launched a vigorous attack on Tangqi, Unotuo, and Xinlongtuan. The defenders fought back fiercely until midnight, when the Japanese finally occupied Unotuo. On the morning of the 14th, the Japanese army launched an attack on the Tangqi position, supported by 2 aircraft and heavy artillery, but they were repelled by the forces of Ma Zhanshan. At around 10 a.m., over 2,000 Japanese troops led by Hasi split into 2 units, infantry and cavalry, and they employed a strategy of large encirclement to assault Tangqi from both the left and right flanks. The cavalry engaged in combat, but were eventually forced to retreat. The intense fighting continued until the morning of the 15th, when the Japanese army targeted Shanma. By this time, Ma Zhanshan had already dispatched 2 cavalry regiments to quietly encircle the enemy's flanks. At his command, the front guard regiment charged into the Japanese positions first, with the cavalry regiment surging from both sides, forcing the Japanese to retreat hastily. Ma Zhanshan's forces captured 2 artillery pieces and 70 horses, killing an estimated 300 Japanese and taking 200 prisoners, while the puppet army suffered apparently over 2,000 casualties and they fled with their weapons. To bolster their defensive capabilities, the defenders organized 2,000 members of the Suiha Security Battalion into an independent regiment and integrated them into the front line. On the 15th, following orders from the Japanese Army Minister Minamijiro, Honjo Shigeru presented 3 demands to Ma Zhanshan. The first, that Ma Zhanshan's troops should withdraw south of the Chinese Eastern Railway. Second, that the area be administered by a Taiman Bureau. And the third, that Ma Zhanshan refrain from interference. However, to all of this, Ma Zhanshan again rejected the demands. At 7:30 a.m. on the 15th, Lieutenant General Taimon, the commander of the Japanese 2nd Division, led the main contingent of his division to the Daxing front. By 11 a.m. on the 16th, with the backing of over 10 aircraft, a lot of heavy artillery, and tanks, 4,000 Japanese infantry and cavalry launched a vigorous assault on the positions, including Xinlongtuan and Sanjiaozhi. The defenders fought valiantly and managed to repel the Japanese forces by 3 p.m., resulting in heavy casualties upon both sides. By 10:10 a.m. on the 17th, Honjo Shigeru received orders from the Chief of Army General Staff to, quote, "Advance north of Qiqihar and attempt to destabilize the enemy with bold maneuvers and have the 2nd Division capture Qiqihar in one decisive strike." To this, he instructed the 39th Mixed Brigade to, quote, "Mobilize all remaining troops in Daxing, except for 1 infantry company and an engineering company. Place them under the command of the 2nd Division leader." At 1 p.m., the divisional commander Daimon ordered the Japanese troops stationed at the Hoyoriba station to launch a full-scale assault upon the Black Army, particularly targeting Sanjiangfang. By 10 p.m. on the 17th, Japanese forces, having received supplies and reinforcements, split into 3 groups and mounted a fierce attack on the Mabu position. Under Amano's command, the right-wing troops advanced from Unotuo to assault the left-wing positions in Xinlongtuan, Despite the Wusongling Brigade being exhausted from several days of fighting, they still fiercely resisted the numerically superior enemy, and they repelled them more than 10 times. However, by early morning, most of the defenders' trenches had been completely destroyed, and their positions were compromised in numerous locations, forcing a retreat to the second line in the Daoxingtun area. At 10:40 p.m. on the 17th, the left-wing Japanese forces, commanded by Hase, attacked the right-wing positions in the Tangqing area, where the Changjin Brigade had fought tenaciously. By 2 a.m. the following day, the Japanese intensified their assault, deploying over 8 tanks and 30 artillery pieces. Unable to sustain the defenses, the defenders retreated to the main position at Sanjiangfang. By 3 a.m. on the 18th, the Japanese army mobilized various units and moved to a designated staging area that they had planned for. By 6:30, aircraft and artillery began a 1-hour bombardment of the frontline positions at Sanjiangfang, to which the defenders responded with their own artillery fire. The booming of the cannons echoed across the entire Shoubei wilderness. At this point, the Japanese heavy artillery had a range of 30 kilometers, while Ma Zhanshan's heavy artillery could not even reach 15 kilometers, resulting in significant losses. At around 8 o'clock, the Japanese forces launched a full-scale attack, supported by tanks. Despite the fierce fighting from the defenders, the Japanese advance was initially repelled. At 9:20, Damen ordered reinforcements from the reserves and initiated another aggressive assault. By 10 o'clock, although the defenders on the right flank fought violently, they were unable to hold their ground and they retreated to Mao Creek. By 10:30, the left flank position at Xiaoxingtun fell, forcing the troops to fight their way back to Hongqi and Yushuancun. At this point, Hase directed the infantry and cavalry to assault the main position at Sanjiangfang, with support of aircraft and tanks. The defending troops, including the Yuan Chonggu Brigade and Zhang Dongzhi Brigade, put up a fierce resistance. By about 2 p.m., the Japanese 39th Mixed Brigade, followed by a regiment from Sangjiangtu to the west of Sanjiangfang, joined the fight. Together with the Hase Brigade, they launched a direct assault and then executed a coordinated pincer movement. After 3 p.m., the Japanese forces added 12 other aircraft and 12 tanks, with over 30 artillery pieces bombarding the trenches with quite an intense fire. And with that, the Japanese were finally able to capture Qiqihar on the 19th. Ma Zhanshan's army was on the brink of starvation after Japanese planes bombed their food storage facilities. The Chinese defenders battled fiercely despite their empty stomachs. They were undeterred by the enemy's overwhelming numbers. They began to engage in hand-to-hand combat, fighting to the death, their battle cries echoing throughout the grounds. Fighting in the Sanjiangfang area continued throughout the night. Although the Chinese troops shared a common hatred and displayed extraordinary bravery, many had gone on for several days without sleep due to relentless fighting, and their food supplies had been cut off, leaving them without any reinforcements. The ammunition available at this time was part of a long-term stockpile from Heilongjiang province. Much of it was rendered unusable due to mold. Meanwhile, the invading forces were continuously bolstered by fresh supplies and reinforcements, creating a dire imbalance between a quite strong enemy and weak defenders. As you can imagine, everything I just said right now is from a PRC source, and they love to throw and sprinkle those little variables, let's say. Furthermore, the position had been heavily damaged and was truly unable to be sustained. On the afternoon of the 18th, Ma Zhanshan was forced to make a difficult decision, and he ordered the withdrawal. By the 19th, over 5,000 Japanese troops had taken control of Qiqihar, marking the end of the battle for Jiangqiao. The civilian population had pushed Ma Zhanshan to pull out, a long-held Chinese tradition that did not mean losing face, but rather living to fight another day. On November the 18th, Ma Zhanshan's forces evacuated Qiqihar, and by the 19th he had led them east to defend Baichuan and Hailun. His army suffered tremendous casualties, possibly up to 3,000, with the Japanese claiming only 300 casualties for themselves. Ma Zhanshan's forces retired to the Noni River Valley and eventually over the Soviet border. The Japanese began an occupation of Qiqihar, thus securing control of all 3 Manchurian provincial capitals. They quickly established a collaborationist government under General Zhang Haipeng, and they secured control over the central section of the Chinese Eastern Railway. However, the eastern section of the railway was still under control of General Jiangqiao, operating in Harbin. Jiangqiao would follow Ma Zhanshan's example, inspiring local Chinese aid, and he would enlist resistance efforts. Ma Zhanshan drew international attention through a series of telegrams he sent describing his campaign of resistance against the Japanese in Heilongjiang. His stand along the Noni River, near Qiqihar, lionized him amongst the Chinese nationalists, who would go on to use his public image to shame Chiang Kai-shek into action against the Japanese. During the Battle of Jiangqiao, Ma Zhanshan fought independently without any assistance from the Northeast Army, based then in Jiangqiao. Although Zhang Haipeng instructed Ma Zhanshan to hold his position, the troops in Jiangqiao were, quote, not ready for combat. Following the battle, Zhang Haipeng faced significant public backlash. The Shanghai National Salvation Federation stated this: Ma Zhanshan's forces in Heilongjiang province fought valiantly against the Japanese and demonstrated loyalty on the battlefield, while Zhang Haipeng failed to provide support. The Citizens Federation sent a telegram to the national government accusing Zhang Haipeng of, quote, neglecting his responsibilities while allowing the Japanese invaders to attack the Northeast, leading to national humiliation and territorial loss. Additionally, the National Student Anti-Japanese National Salvation Federation, that's quite a name, sent a telegram urging the government to, quote, severely punish Zhang Haipeng and deploy his troops immediately. Chiang Kai-shek sent multiple telegrams to praise Ma Zhanshan for his brave resistance and instructed Zhang Haipeng to quickly provide reinforcements. For example, on November the 12th, Chiang Kai-shek sent a message to Ma Zhanshan stating this: Japan has once again invaded Heilongjiang province under the pretext of repairing the Jiangqiao Bridge. Our defensive actions were justified. Fortunately, due to your careful leadership and the bravery of the soldiers, we managed to defeat the relentless enemy and protect our territory. I was furious upon receiving the telegram. You and your comrades have brought honor to the party and the nation, fighting for survival. The entire Chinese populace is inspired. The people's spirit remains unbroken, justice prevails, and the future is hopeful. We pledge to unite in our efforts. I shed tears in the wind and snow, unable to express all my thoughts. Dear Chiang Kai-shek. Additionally, on the 19th, Chiang Kai-shek wrote again to Ma Zhanshan: I have read your telegram, and I am filled with sorrow and anger that words cannot capture. Our army has fought valiantly for days, bringing glory to our nation. Our reputation has spread widely, earning admiration both domestically and internationally, which is truly commendable. I have urged Deputy Commander Zhang Haipeng to send troops to assist you. I miss you dearly as I write this message, dear Chiang Kai-shek. By the way, Chiang Kai-shek is completely lying. He did not send such an order to Zhang Haipeng, he's just trying to save face. All major domestic newspapers covered the Jiangqiao anti-Japanese war prominently, and various sectors of society conveyed their condolences to the frontline soldiers in numerous ways. Life Weekly, backed by Zhou Taofen, remarked, this spirit of defending the nation and refusing to surrender, even in death, is crucial for the future of the Chinese people. It demonstrates to the world that our soldiers are not entirely dishonorable and have restored significant pride for the nation. The Shanghai Fujian Tobacco Company even created a General Ma Zhanshan cigarette, promoting the slogan, May everyone emulate General Ma Zhanshan. On November the 17th, the Binjiang Times published an editorial stating this: the Chinese soldiers in Heilongjiang fought valiantly against the brutality of the Japanese army. The blood shed along the Nanjiang River is the legacy of our brave men. The Chinese army in Heilongjiang represents the true warriors defending the nation. After the September 18th incident, we began to doubt how many Chinese soldiers could confront the enemy, and we were deeply disappointed. 50 days after losing Liaoning and Jilin provinces, we realized that Ma Zhanshan in Heilongjiang truly deserves the title of Chinese soldier. People all across the country spontaneously formed groups for condolences and support, donating money and supplies to aid Heilongjiang's resistance efforts. Many young students set aside their studies to join the anti-Japanese volunteer army. The resistance was forming. I would like to take this time to remind all of you that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Please go subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube. You can also produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. Hey, don't forget about our sister podcast over at the Pacific War Week by Week podcast, written and narrated by me. And if after all that, if you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel found over at YouTube, and Echoes of War found on major podcast platforms. Over on the YouTube channel, I just released How to Play the Soviet Union in Axis and Allies. It's pretty funny, I do recommend it. And on Echoes of War, we just finished our 4-part series covering who are the best and worst generals, admirals, and air commanders of World War II. If you'd like to further support me, please go check out my YouTube membership or my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/The Pacific War Channel. By joining either, you get access to the exclusive podcast, early access to all the content I make, and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. This month's exclusive podcast is How the Sicilian Mafia Helped the Allies During World War II. Oh, and by the way, if you're listening on Spotify, I finally linked up the Patreon to Spotify so you can listen there directly and check out the entire catalog. Thus ended the Jiangqiao campaign. General Ma Zhanshan proved himself quite a formidable rebel leader in the face of pretty overwhelming odds. His name was propagandized heavily by the Chinese press to boost morale, to try and awaken the Chinese that a fight for their very existence was at hand. But China simply did not have the means yet to face such an enemy.